Are you aspiring to ace the UPSC CSE? Commence your transformational journey with the Vision IAS Delhi GS Foundation Course 2025. Empower your exam preparation through cutting-edge educational technology and personalized learning experiences with tech-enabled learning. Dive into concepts with animations, videos, and interactive tools designed for maximum understanding and retention. Personalized student portal. Access live classes, recorded sessions, and extensive academic resources, all at your fingertips, anytime, anywhere. Enroll now and step closer to accomplishing your IAS dream. With the Vision IAS Delhi GS Foundation Course 2025, batches starting from 31st August 5 p.m., 17th September 9 a.m., 24th September 1 p.m., 30th September 5 p.m.
Hello. All right. The next topic we can pick up is gig economy. Once again, the context is important. The context behind the creation of gig economy is what you can broadly think of the rise of what is called a digital economy. Now, what is a digital economy? Right. You need to understand the basic differentiation. What is economics? How do you define economics? Or how do you understand economics? Right. You must know that the principle behind the creation of a subject which is economics is one that of scarcity. Scarcity principle says what? It says there are resources which are limited, but wants which are unlimited. Since resources are limited, while wants are unlimited, therefore there emerges a need for what we call the optimal allocation of resources for the greatest good. Now, the optimal allocation of resources, or the science behind this optimal allocation of resources, is what we may want to call economics, right? Which is to say, all the important decisions with respect to production, consumption, and even the distribution of goods and services categorically become a part of a subject which is a social science called economics. Now, depending upon what we are talking about, we may differentiate it between individual level decisions or the economy of the aggregates, right? Microeconomics or macroeconomics. Now, this is economics. When you add or when you place these critical economic decisions, one that of production, consumption, and that of distribution, when you associate this with a territory, that is when it becomes the economy of that territory. Economy is what? All of these important economic decisions of production, consumption, distribution associated with a specific territory. Now that you know what economy means, what should digital economy mean? Digital economy would be very, very simple, which is to say all of these important decisions, when they are taken to this space that we have created, the territory now is what you may want to call the web, the digital space, or the cyberspace. That is what is called digital economy. In the last 2 decades for sure, there has been an unprecedented rise of digital economy. Now, specifically in the last decade, there have emerged 2 trends with respect to this digital economy. One is changes to the way we work, or changes in the way work is being organized. That is one. And the second important change is the way we consume, or rather not consume, we will say the way we procure services. 2 things have fundamentally changed, right? One is the way we work or the way we organize work, right? Which is, say, for example, you can work from home now, right? Previously, which was except for in certain sectors, thought of rather as impossible. And the way we procure services. These 2 changes have led to the creation of a range of different kind of economies that you need to understand. You may want to call some aspect of it the sharing economy. What is the sharing economy? The sharing economy is one where assets are shared and they are also financialized. For example, Uber is an aggregator. All of the Uber drivers, they are using their own asset, which is their own car, right? And they are financializing it, right? So they're monetizing it. They are partnering with Uber as a driver partner of sorts, and they are using their specific asset to monetize it, right? That is one. That's the part of the emergence of sharing economy. Another example of sharing economy would be, for example, Airbnbs, right? People who may have properties, these properties are now being monetized. How? By sharing them with a certain platform, which is one that of Airbnb for that matter. Ola is also an aggregator of cabs for that matter, right? This is called the sharing economy. Another economy which has shot up is what is called the gig economy. What is the gig economy in general? Now, there is a definitional problem with respect to gig economy. First, what is a gig? What is the definition or the direct, or you can say the dictionary meaning of a gig? Right? Normally, any task which is either performed informally or on a demand basis, right? In a temporary manner, in a freelance manner, is something what we call a gig. What is a gig economy? There are multiple definitions of the term gig economy. For example, the ILO has the most watertight definition of gig economy. The ILO says gig economy basically consists of 2 types of work. The first type of work would be something which is called micro tasks. Micro tasks, which is to say, which can be performed online and can be crowdsourced. What is a micro task? A micro task is if there is a bigger task, you divide it into smaller chunks, right? If these micro tasks can be performed online, and if you are crowdsourcing these micro tasks, right, that will be one aspect of gig economy. For example, you would have seen multiple hoardings where they say data collection ki job 15,000 रुपए पाइए घर बैठे बैठे काम के आपका data collection, data refining, all of those tasks are micro tasks. The other tasks that the ILO says forms a part of gig economy is which services which are being generated online and can be performed locally. Now the definition is a little too watertight. It's a little too technical also, right? Which is one micro tasks, certain tasks which can be categorized as micro tasks can be performed online and are crowdsourced, which is you're deploying a range of people, right, who are doing this specific activity for you. And then services which can be generated online by certain online companies and they can be performed locally. For example, hyper-local delivery of sorts. That's one example of it. This definition does not give you a lot of insight. There is this definition that the Boston Consultancy Group has come out with. The Boston Consultancy Group defines gig economy as an environment. This is an environment where temporary, or you may say contingent work, this is the norm, or this is common. Such an environment where temporary work, contingent work is common, and organizations contract workers independently to perform these tasks on a temporary, or you may say, or on an on-demand basis. That is how the BCG defines this, which I think is the most understandable definition, right? Gig economy is an environment where temporary work or contingent work ka matlab kya hai? Which is something that you do not perform as a part of a formal task force, right? Freelance work, if you may want to think of it this way. Temporary work, contingent work is the norm. It's the most common type of work, and organizations hire independent workers, or they hire workers independently rather, right, to perform these tasks on a temporary basis or on an on-demand basis. That is how they define gig economy. McKinsey goes a little bit deeper. McKinsey does not define gig economy. McKinsey defines gig worker, exactly what our code on social security does. Right? Our code on social security does not define gig economy, does not define platform economy. It defines gig worker and it defines platform worker. How does McKinsey define a gig worker? McKinsey says, who is a gig worker? A gig worker, one is an individual who is hired on a time-based manner or on a task-based manner. And this specific worker also enjoys the freedom to plug and play, which is to say, there is some freedom for this specific worker to plug and play, which is to say, whenever he wants to work, he will become a part of this organization. Whenever he wants to exit, he may exit that. That is how they define a gig worker, right? Any worker, any individual who is hired by an organization in a time-based manner. Time-based manner would be that he's not formally on their payroll forever. He does not have a contract which extends, indefinitely. There is a certain time or a brief period of time for which he is hired, or he is hired on an on-task basis, which is say, perform this task for us, and this is the only thing that you have to do, right? And it's the employer, so the employee rather, who has a certain freedom in terms of plugging and playing, which is say, whenever he wants to, he may want to do this work. When he wants to exit, he may want to exit it. That's how they define a gig worker. Regardless of what the definition of gig economy is, one thing is for certain, which is the prospects of gig economy, right? How this economy has been expanding of late. There are certain few numbers that you have to take care of. Certain few numbers which are global, and some few numbers which are specific to the Indian context. Right. Globally speaking, the World Bank points out that in 2019, 6% of the workforce of the entire world was involved in the gig economy. 6% of the workforce. In some economies, for example, that of US, more than 35% of their workforce was involved in gig economy. Right? These are certain numbers which are very, very staggering. In fact, what they have pointed out is that in terms of value, gig workers are generating 4.5, not billion, sorry, 4.5 trillion US dollars worth of value. 4.5 trillion worth of value across the world, 6% of the global workforce, right? In certain countries, for example, that of US, 35% of the workforce is involved in gig economy itself, right? They have also pointed out that these workers are higher in terms of numbers in developing economies than in developed economies rather. In developed economies, they say only about 1 to 4% of workforce in developed economies considers gig economy as their primary source of income. You understand what a primary source of income would mean? This is their main source of income, right? Only about 1 to 4% of workers in the developed world. In the developing world, for example, countries like India and China, roughly 10 to 12% of our workforce think of gig economy as the primary source of income for them. These are certain few numbers which are not very recent. The numbers that I could find for you were 2019, but very, very credible numbers coming in from the World Bank itself. In terms of India, what are these numbers? Some of the numbers, as have been pointed out by the Niti Aayog, they make a classification between gig economy and platform economy. Now you have to remember that platform economy is a subset of the gig economy, which is to say where gig workers are finding work which is organized by certain platforms, right? For example, Uber is a platform, right? Uber is trying to connect people who want certain transit facilities, right, or certain conveyance facilities, right, with certain drivers. It's a platform of sorts. This work is being organized by a platform. When this work is being organized by a platform and it is being secured by gig workers from a certain platform, that is when they become a platform worker, which is to say platform worker will be a subset of the broader gig economy. In India, because of definitional problems with respect to gig economy, what they're saying is the current estimates are that roughly around 6 to 8 million people right now in India are a part of the gig workforce. 6 to 8 million. What they're expecting is that this will rise up to about 90 million in the next 10 years. Currently, 6 to 8 million, going to rise up to 90 million in the next 10 years is what they are thinking. Now, amongst these, there are a few key sectors where workers are involved the most. The biggest sector would be retail trade. For example, you would have seen something like the hyper-local delivery of that matter, right? Blinkit, right? You would have seen Zomato for that matter. You would have seen Swiggy, Instamart, right? You would have seen Big Basket. Retail services is the biggest chunk, followed by manufacturing. Followed by transport, followed by manufacturing, and there is some elements of educational services too. These four sectors, the retail trade, the transport and logistics sector, the manufacturing sector, these sectors are going to form roughly around 70 million of these jobs which are going to happen in the next 10 years is what the Niti Aayog proposes. Right? This is the numbers coming in from Niti Aayog itself. Platform workers, on the other hand, right now, somewhere around 0.3 million of platform workers. What they said was in 2020, 11 platforms said that they have hired roughly around 20 lakh such workers, platform workers. And what they're expecting is in the next 3 to 4 years only, this number is going to increase to roughly around 24 million workers. These are the prospects. These are prospects as are happening across the world, not just in India. In fact, these prospects are brighter for developing countries than they are for developing countries. There is an empirical evidence for these particular factors or these trends also. In the last 10 years, पिछले 10 सालों में, the employment elasticity of gig workers has been consistently greater than 1. In the last 10 years, employment elasticity, what do you mean employment elasticity, or generally what do you mean by elasticity? Yes, elasticity or sensitiveness would mean change in one variable with respect to changes in the other variable. Whenever we are talking about employment elasticity, we are basically referencing GDP, which is say per 1 unit rise in GDP, how much is the rise in gig workforce, right? In the last 10 years, employment elasticity in the gig economy has consistently been greater than 1. There are empirical trends for this. In fact, this number is only going to rise in the coming future. These are your prospects. Now, when you're thinking of these prospects, you may want to argue or you may want to think as to why is this happening? Why do you think that gig economy is becoming so promising for you? Generally speaking, if you may want to categorize it, you may want to think of it as what are the key factors behind these trends? You may find multiple factors, but you have to remember there are the twin forces, one that of technology, and another is that of demography. These are the twin major factors that are fueling this unprecedented change. Technology, how? Because now technology has made outsourcing of multiple kinds of work very, very possible. Technology has enabled the creation of what is called the micro-task economy, right? Multiple tasks can now be classified into or can now be divided into smaller tasks, and these tasks can be crowdsourced. If you remember, there was a rise of something called the BPO back in the day. From BPO, there was a rise of something called KPOs. Right? BPO used to be business process outsourcing. For example, any organization, for example, if a production company or a TV company, the main task or the core function is production and sales. Right? After sales service could be outsourced. Right? Anybody who could speak English, right, could possibly deal with consumers or complaints coming in from, let's say, the Western economies for that matter. Right? That is them outsourcing a certain business process. Then they started outsourcing something called a knowledge process too. Knowledge process ka matlab kya? Normally this would be work coming in from consultancies. Right? For example, consultancies are hired in to give them insights on key business decisions. For example, Bajaj may hire, let's say, McKinsey to ask of them whether we should, let's say, rope into the sector of creating these motorcycles or not. In fact, they were really roped in. It's a very, very famous case. McKinsey very famously, rather infamously, had recommended Bajaj that they should not venture into the motorcycle space. And then Bajaj, of course, did not agree to this. The rest is history. Right? Now, McKinsey may have a lot of independent consultants. These consultants are going to churn in a lot of data. They're going to derive actionable insights on this specific data. Now, it's going to take a lot of time for them to engage in what is called a primary research, secondary research, scanning all of this data, compiling it all. What they would want to do is they would outsource this specific process, right? So this is one level high, right, which is in terms of the skill value chain, it's a one notch higher, right? So you will rope in certain graduates in India. These graduates will then be involved in the work of primary research, secondary research. They will be compiling this data, eventually to be fed to these consultants who are going to make PPTs out of it, and they're going to sell it, right? That is called KPO, right? Knowledge process outsourcing. Now, a lot of these tasks with respect to data analytics, with respect to data compilation, with respect to data engineering for that matter, with respect to web development, a lot of activities now can be broken down into micro tasks, and they can now be outsourced. This has been made possible by the rise of technology itself. This is one factor fueling it. The other factor fueling this is technology has made possible something called hyperlocal services, which are geography-based or geolocation-based services. For example, delivery. For example, transit. Right? If I'm here, I want to go back to South Extension, I need a ride. Right? Technology has now made it possible to deliver to me this specific ride based on my location. Right? They will connect me to the nearest driver, right, when we agree at a certain price, and the driver will come pick me up and drop me off. Right? This is the kind of a new kind of economic activity which has been powered by technology itself. In fact, technology has also allowed a lot of home services which were previously delivered not at your home, but at a certain mom and pop store for that matter. For example, you would see grooming services, plumbing, right? A lot of these services, right? Now their delivery to your homes has been made possible. Right? This has been aided by technology itself, and you will not forget the role played by COVID in the last few years, which accelerated this digitalization because it necessitated this kind of a change. Right? This is technology driven. The second key aspect that you have to remember is the forces of demography. A country like India is witnessing such unprecedented change. Why? Because a country like India also has about 500 million people who are in the working age now. A lot of these people require employment. What gig economy does is gives them two things. One, it gives them very, very low entry barriers. You really don't have to be a graduate to be, let's say, an Uber writer for that matter. You don't have to be a graduate to be a Zomato delivery partner. There are very, very low entry barriers. And second is the flexibility. Both of these things are very, very attractive. Flexibility ka matlab kya? This is a plug and play model. If I want to work, let's say 2 hours a day, I will work 2 hours a day. If I want to, really slog and work 17 hours a day, I really want to make money, driving my cab, I can do that too. Right? There is that flexibility that I am going to decide. It's not my employer who's going to decide this for me. Right? Both of these things are very, very attractive. Right? And this is why your demography is now being roped in towards this kind of work. Now, very close to this is also what COVID did. COVID necessitated digitalization, which meant what? Which meant a lot of services had to go online, right? And because this was pretty much the only source of procurement of services too for people, this created a certain digital economy, but a digital economy with a much wider reach. In fact, in my own experience itself, like I have been with another firm previously, we were trying to, create a knowledge-based solution for people. Back in the day, the uptake among students with respect to online classes was fairly low. Right? The moment COVID hit, this was the only way you could study. Right? Which is why a lot of online or online-based classroom platforms have now they're very, very consolidated markets. Right? Previously, this was not the case. This was necessitated by COVID. A lot of digital companies showed up, which now have a far wider reach. Right? Not only do they have a lot of wider reach, this wider reach also attracts a lot of investments. In fact, in the BRICS region alone, roughly around 70% of investments made in gig economy go to only two countries. One is China, followed by India. You may want to guess numbers. China is roughly around 73% of this number, and the remaining goes to India itself. 70% of investment made towards gig economy amongst BRIC nations goes to only two economies. One is that of China, the other one is that of India, both powered by demography, both powered by technology for that matter. In fact, you can now connect DPI with this too, right? Now, these numbers are going to tell you as to why gig economy has been picking up of late, right? Now, you may want to consider whether this is a good prospect or this is a bad prospect. What is it that gig economy really has in store for you? Does it have benefits? Does it have any challenges? What kind of issues does it have? In terms of benefits of gig economy, are these trends really so good? What might you argue? What do you think would be the benefits of gig economy? Employment, absolutely. Right? We have spoken about employment in general. Right? It's a very general point for you to write, oh, there will be more employment. Yes, of course, there will be more employment. But one thing that you have to touch upon is, right, all of these platforms are doing a real-time skill matching of people. Right? This is a real-time matching of demand and supply. If you have heard of something called frictional unemployment, have you heard of it? Right? What is frictional unemployment? No, that is a very specific example of frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment would mean unemployment created because there is a friction or there is some inefficiency in the labor market. Right? For example, there is a job. For example, I want to be a data analyst. Right? I have the required skill set for it. I am unemployed right now, and I'm also willing to work. right? I'm willing to work. I want this specific job. There is a position which is being created right now as we are speaking. Some person has probably been fired. Some person has possibly decided to resign, right? Whatever. There is a vacancy which got created. Now, between that vacancy getting created and between me knowing it, there's a lot of time gap which is going to happen. Those people are going to first recognize that this is a vacancy created. They may probably want to, negotiate with them. Once they have, firmly figured out that yes, it is a vacancy created, then they're going to put it on a job portal. Then between them putting it on a job portal and me looking at that exact opportunity on the job portal, and then me applying for this job portal amongst a range of applications and resumes, right? The people figuring out my resume, then calling me for an interview, then taking my interview, 20 rounds, and then I get selected, and then I'm given a certain time to join. An efficient labor market would have done what? It would have said, oh, there is an employment created, there is a vacancy created, there is a person who is eventually going to be hired. An efficient labor market is going to do it in a real-time basis, right? But of course, right, there is a certain friction in the labor market itself, which is that there will be some time gap. Right? For example, digitization reduces this time gap for that matter. Previously, there used to be something called an employment news, right, which would be a bi-weekly or a weekly of that matter, and you would understand, oh, there are these vacancies through that specific channel. Now, digitization has done what? It has created online web portals. At least there is some reduction of this time. This friction cannot be completely done away with, but it can certainly be reduced if you have certain technology, right? This gig economy is doing what? This is doing this matching of demand and supply in the labor market in real time. This is an example of friction being reduced in real time, right? Which is, say, you want to get a haircut, right? You just log on to Urban Company, find a person, or you may say just raise that request. You will be automatically connected to a certain person who will show up at your doorstep probably in an hour's time or whenever you want him to, right? This is what you call skill mismatch, demand and supply matching in the labor market in real time, reducing a lot of friction. Not only is it creating employment, of course, you're going to mention that, yes, the prospects are, it's going to create like 90 million jobs in the next 10 years, but you definitely have to mention this point for sure. This is staggering. The kind of demand and supply in the labor market, demand for labor and supply of labor being matched in the labor market in real-time basis, which is happening in the gig economy, is unprecedented. This is one thing that you have to mention. What else would you want to mention? You were saying something? Anything else in respect of gig economy? One very, very important thing you should talk about is the facilitation of what is called micro entrepreneurship. Now, micro entrepreneurship in simple terms means entrepreneurship on a micro scale, like a really small business. Gig economy is facilitating micro entrepreneurship. The reasons are a little too technical. Why? Because all of these gig workers are basically classified as independent partners, right? Generally speaking, these are people who are, you will not want to call them the part of their workforce or not on their payroll. They are independent partners, right? For example, any sharing economy, and Uber will require you to continue with your asset. You have a certain asset, you want to be a part of Uber. You log on to Uber, there are very, very low entry barriers, and then you start taking these assignments straight up. This is an example of micro entrepreneurship. Micro entrepreneurship is being powered by two things. Once again, this will be asset ownership, followed by its financialization, or you may want to call it monetization. A lot of people had a lot of their assets. For example, people had a lot of motorbikes, right? People had cars. These assets were lying idle. They were lying unproductive. Now, if you can use this asset to generate some money for you, you have monetized this specific asset, right? This is an addition of what you may want to call micro entrepreneurship, right? These are not big scale businessmen, but you can think of these people as generating some sort of a self-employment for themselves by utilizing their own assets. Sometimes you may not have your own asset, right? You may be hired in as, let's say, a driver for a certain person who has like 15 cars, right? But you are a part of, let's say, Uber or an Ola for that matter. Ola may eventually also help you to secure finance. In fact, you may not be a part of Uber, Ola in general. You may be an independent driver for that matter. You can show these lenders your cash flows, and you can secure certain finance for you to make more assets too, right? A lot of people in the early days of Uber, because early days Uber incentives are really, really great. A lot of people acquired a lot of assets in that specific point in time. You remember a time when if you just logged on to Uber, you got rupees 600 as credit. Right? People would get incentives to the extent of, if you drive 4 hours a day, 3,000 rupees. If you drive, let's say, 6 hours a day, you're going to get like 8,000 rupees. There were people, drivers, who made lakhs of money, right? And then people, of course, when they see this is very, very lucrative, they would want to engage in creating much more assets. Like, why would I want to generate income from only one car? Let me buy another one. I'll hire a driver. I'll make money here too, right? This is gig economy facilitating what is called micro entrepreneurship. In addition, what will you talk about? You may talk about what is called formalization. Now remember, if you mention formalization, you will have to write about it in a certain rider, right? With a rider. Why? Because formalization of the economy basically means two things, right? One, it means that the business is, let's say, a part of the tax net. And the business may be required to give social security or extend social security cover to its employees basis size. Right? Two things primarily. One is the social security aspect of formalization. The other one is the aspect of finances or the financial side, which is to say, a business, has it been registered? Has it been incorporated? If it has been registered and incorporated, it automatically, the government has a certain footprint of this specific business. Now, this business may generate any revenues, right? They may pay certain taxes to the government. The government knows of this specific business. The other aspect of formalization is social security, right? Social security is on a size basis, depending upon how big an organization you are. You may be required to extend EPF, right? Employees Provident Fund. You may be required to extend ESIC, right? Which is basically a form of health insurance, depending upon the size and a certain few, you can say, remuneration criteria too, right? There are companies which are called purely formal. There are companies which are called purely informal. Purely formal would be one which is a part of the tax net too, plus also extends social security. There may be companies which are a part of GST net, but may not be extending social securities because there are certain companies or certain sectors which are granted GST exemptions. There may be certain companies which give GST away, but are not formally a part of the tax net. There may be companies which don't do both, which are not formally a part of the tax net, also do not extend social security. These are called purely informal. In terms of the gig economy, there are some footprints being generated here on the financial side of things, right? Because you are dealing with big payment aggregators, big aggregators for that matter, like a Zomato or a Swiggy for that matter. So if you're registering there, of course, there is data being generated that you are involved as an independent partner with this specific platform, and the platform is making some money to you. And in fact, there is some GST deduction too. So you automatically become a part of the tax net. The company knows about, or the government knows about you. But this part is not being taken care of just yet, right? So if you want to talk about formalization, you may say this is a good initiation in terms of formalization of the economy. Why? By creating, or how? By creating digital footprints of people. The government knows about these people, right? You will talk about this, right? What else would you want to talk about? You may want to talk about democratization of employment. Now, this is a socio-economic aspect. What do you mean by democratization of employment? Think of an economy where there is no platform work, where there is no gig work, right? Anybody who wants to secure employment, a person's social capital plays a huge role there, right? You are a woman, you are a man. You are a upper caste, you are a lower caste. You are a certain religious community, you are not a certain religious community. Some communities in the country enjoy a certain social capital, and this social capital, this network, helps people from those communities secure employment too. The kind of employment which is being generated by gig economy is independent of that. It is agnostic to what your social identity is. If you have any kind of skills, low-skilled work, semi-skilled work, highly skilled work, if you are skilled enough, you are just required to plug and play. There are very low entry barriers, right? If there is some work for you, they're going to assign that work for you too. This is what you call democratization of employment, which is to say making social capital a little redundant. This is being made redundant. Now, you can talk about this too. What else can you talk about? You may want to talk about another important point is professionalizing blue collar work. Right? Making blue collar work far more professional, which is to say, one, if you look at the definition of the employment, the definition of employment gives some flexibility to the worker itself. It is the worker who has some amount of flexibility whenever he wants to work, whenever he does not want to work, he can plug in, plug out. That is one. That means the employer cannot force this specific worker to run any other errands for them. Your task as an Uber driver is only to, let's say, log into the app, make yourself available online. You will get certain rights, deliver those rights. You want to log out, go. Uber is not going to require you to do other things for you, which was not previously the case for any other blue collar work. Right? Blue collar people, of course, they were involved in domestic services. You would have to run errands for people. That is some professionalization. That is one. Second is in terms of timely payments. Right? Now, Zomato, Swiggy, Uber, Ola, if you have ever spoken to any Uber driver, Uber typically gives remuneration after every week. Right? Ola pretty much does it after every 2 to 3 days. Right? This work you are paid for on a timely basis. It's not like you have an informal sort of an arrangement with your employer who will give you money as and when he wants or as and when he feels like or as and when he remembers that he has to pay you. Right? That is some sort of professionalization of blue collar work. This is very, very important. Why? Because it is fundamentally linked with agency and dignity of work, which will be an attractive factor for people in the future to join this workforce to timely payments. Right? You are only required to deliver services. You are going to require no errands. You don't have to do anything else for the employer itself. That is professionalization of blue collar work. What else can you talk about in terms of benefits? Is there anything that you can think of? You should talk about reliability of services, something from the consumer end too. Right? It's not like these urban services were never spoken of or never thought of previously. For example, everybody in cities required something called a plumbing service. You will require the service of an electrician too. How do you know that whether this electrician is a good enough person or not? How do you know whether this plumber is actually true to his salt or not? There is no certified rating agency. Nobody certifies this kind of work. You do not know what his experience has been. Right? So there is a huge information asymmetry. Now on these platforms, you would have seen all of these platforms have a certain few ratings. Uber has driver ratings. Ola has driver ratings. Urban Company has ratings for their professionals. Right? Those ratings help people make, you can say, accurate decisions. So if you, for example, in my personal capacity, if there is a Uber driver who comes to me 4.8 less, I will never take that ride. It's as simple as that. I actually trust Uber's rating system. I'm not going to ride anybody who is less than 4.8. Right? For me, 4.8 is a signal. It's a quantifiable metric. I'm going to trust Uber's rating system and I'm going to go with that. Right? That is telling me some reliability of services. You say, I'm pretty sure this driver is not going to ask me where to come. He's not going to ask me if I'm paying in cash, if I'm paying digitally. He's not going to be any nuisance for me. Right? For me, this service is one, reliable. Reliable ka matlab kya? I'm paying this money to him. This person is going to come. And he may cancel, Uber may find me another driver. But this service is reliable. Plus, the service is also of some quantity or sorry, of some quality that can be actually verified, that can actually be trusted. This is from the consumer's perspective. Most of it you have to think from the employee's perspective. Right? Same thing you have to talk about from the consumer's perspective too. Benefits of gig economy, 6 benefits are more than enough for you to remember. Now this gig economy is not, of course, not bereft of challenges. It also presents certain issues. What are the issues faced by gig workers? Anybody? Okay, you can talk about this. Or social security. The biggest, if you are ever getting any question on this, and if they ask you challenges of gig workers, this cannot be not your first point. This is what you call misclassification. People who are gig workers, they are either classified as independent contractors or they are classified as partners, independent partners. They're not a part of the formal payroll of that specific company. You are an independent partner of that company. You are an independent contractor of that company. Pretty much, you are a self-employed person who is, you can think of it, engaging with this company specifically for this purpose. You're not an employee of this company. Why do businesses do this? Primarily to escape labor regulations. These labor regulations may pertain to, let's say, conditions of work. These may, you can say, pertain to hours of work. These may pertain to wage laws. These may even pertain to social security. To avoid these labor regulations, these workers are classified as independent contractors or as independent partners. They are not on the formal payroll of these companies. Right? The company hence escapes regulations. These regulations, be it in terms of the conditions of work, hours of work, wage-related regulations, minimum wage-related regulations, or with respect to social security. If I am a partner of Uber, Uber does not have to give me anything in terms of employee provident fund because I'm not the employee there. Right? Uber does not have to extend to me SIC coverage. No. Right? Uber does not have to worry about my hourly wage rates. I'm not a worker of Uber. I'm a partner of Uber. Right? Now, normally this is done because there is some tax incentive for the independent worker also, which the workers also agree with it. Right? But broadly, this is done primarily by the companies to, what you can say, escape labor regulations. Because these workers or these companies are escaping labor regulations, this becomes a critical concern. Social security, as is extended to, or in a conventional employer-employee relationship. Right? There is a certain size threshold, right? But it is normally extended. These people escape it. You have to talk about this. You may also talk about the second point, which is one that of what is called the algorithmic control of workers. Right? What do you mean by algorithmic control of workers? A lot in terms of what kind of work will be assigned to you or whether work will be assigned to you or not will be decided by algorithms. And a critical component of these algorithms is what is called ratings-based reputation systems. I just gave you an example of a ratings-based reputation system. For example, Uber mein ratings is also a reputation system, which is say if you are, let's say, consistently rated below 4.5, 4.4 odd, right, you may be deplatformed for that matter, right? If some consumer gives some person a certain bad review, for example, there is a plumber who showed up at my house, he did a fairly decent job or the problem was basically unmanageable within his terms of reference, right? I give him a bad rating, he may even be penalized for that matter, right? He may not get his exact, you can say, remuneration for that delivery too. A lot of people claim false reimbursements, refunds from Swiggy, from Zomato, right? They affect what? They affect these rating systems, right? They're going to rate that specific driver, probably a 1-star or a 2-star, or maybe not even that. They may rate him badly. They may give a bad feedback to this. Each of these companies is seriously reliant on these systems, ratings-based systems. These rating-based systems do what? They give a disproportionate power to who? To the consumer. Consumer gets far more power over the worker. It is the consumer who has to give ratings, right? And this rating affects the reputation, and this reputation may affect availability of work because people may be deplatformed, it may even affect the remuneration, because there may be some penalties that the platform may apply or levy on that specific worker. Right? This is pretty horrendous. Another aspect of this algorithmic based control is with respect to data privacy. There are certain concerns with respect to data privacy. Right? In fact, Zomato servers were hacked, right? Roughly around, if I'm not mistaken, around 12 lakh consumers' personal information was also leaked. Right? How these companies, how these platforms store your information, store your personal information, because they have critical information in terms of your exact address. They know your phone number, they know your name, they know your exact address. Right? That is personal information. That's deeply critical information for some people. How it is stored, how it is retrieved, how is it transferred or exchanged between multiple partners. Right? This raises concerns of data security too. What else? No, there are grievance redressal mechanisms. You can talk about, now, there are points which are related to this only. Right? Because the worker has to ultimately appease the consumer, right? It may induce some occupational hazards too. For example, each of these hyperlocal delivery apps promises delivery, let's say, within 10 minutes. They promise delivery within 8 minutes, within 20 minutes of time. And people realize, and these workers realize, that if they are going to take, let's say, a little bit of an extra time, they may be rated badly. That may affect the remuneration, that may affect the availability of work, which is why they end up taking certain risks. You would have seen people on a U-turn, hamesha ulta hi jate hue. Right? You may have seen people driving a little rashly. Right? That may be induced because of the occupations. In fact, there are certain Uber driver partners or Uber partners who have reported cases of assault and even murders in many cases. Right? There are occupational risks which may emerge from this specific platform too. You can talk about this. What else can you talk about? Work-life balance, no, you will not talk about work-life balance because there is flexibility given to you. You want to plug and play? Great for you. You may talk about something called a skill mismatch. We spoke of skill matching there, right? Or we spoke about in the labor market, demand and supply is being matched in the scale, you can say at a scale which is unprecedented. You should definitely talk about what is called a skill mismatch. What is a skill mismatch? In fact, if you look at what is called the micro-task economy or the micro-task subsector, which is primarily with respect to data collection, with respect to data storage, data refining, right? Roughly around 57% of people who are employed or who, you can say, partake in this activity, they are all graduates. But the kind of work does not really take care of or does not really merit, right, this kind of an educational requirement, which is to say they are underemployed. This is called underemployment by skill. There is something called underemployment by skill, underemployment by duration. Right? People who may want to work for longer hours are getting work for lesser hours. People who have the skills to do far better things are doing things, or you can say, whose skills are an overkill for the job that they are doing. And you can talk about a skill mismatch too. What else can you talk about? You can talk about this for occupational hazards में आप डाल सकते हो, health impacts though. Absolutely you should talk about this, right? वो labor regulations का ही part आएगा, right? You have to talk about, because each of these persons is involved as an independent contractor. What does that mean? It means it's not a traditional employer-employee relationship. It's not like employees are sitting together, meeting each other. They're not forming any social networks. Every person is involved in his independent capacity. Whatever capital, social capital they may generate would be probably because, you know, they meet somewhere, let's say at a parking spot. Right? They're not connected to each other. Since they're not connected to each other, this also affects what is called their collective bargaining power. You will rarely find any unions of drivers. Rarely you would find any unions. Why? This is the design of the system. The system has been designed in a manner that people are not going to interact. These workers are not going to interact with each other. Right? It is going to you can say worsen their situation in terms of forming social networks or forming collective organizations or unions for that matter to argue for their own rights, right? You can talk about this, absolutely good point. Dehumanization, you can, if you want to go ethical route down, you can certainly talk about that. What else? Anybody? Skill mismatch, and you can talk about occupational hazards, data privacy. I think these are good enough points, right, in terms of risks. Now, what could be the solutions? Or would you want to talk about the solutions first, right? Remember, you have to have a certain bit of a balanced approach, which is say you see that there are certain merits to having a gig economy. You see there are certain demerits to having a gig economy too. What you should talk about is, right, steps that can be taken. Yeah, steps that can be taken to accelerate and improve the gig economy or the gig sector. You have to remember, you do not have to think of this aspect of the economy primarily from an activist perspective. You also have to consider that there is a lot of merit too. We discussed all the points in terms of arguments in favor of the sector too. So you talk about, yes, you want this sector to be accelerated. In fact, you should always argue that the government should focus on diffusion of gig economy. It should allow people, in fact, you should argue that it should handhold people to become a part of the platform workforce or of the gig workforce or set up platforms of their own. You should talk about this, right? Because of the kind of benefits that this specific sector gives you. How will the government do this? The government can do this through changes in policy. The government can also help in terms of finance. For example, to promote transit facilities or platform work in, let's say, the transport sector, the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, they have removed the requirement of carrying a commercial license now. You don't have to have a commercial license to drive a specific vehicle or a commercial vehicle. Right? Commercial vehicle ki registration alag hai, right? You don't require a commercial license to drive a commercial vehicle. This regulation, this license requirement has been done over with, right? Only and only to promote more people joining this workforce. You have to remember, half of your population, if you're not half, rather, you can say 400 million of your people are in the working age group. You would want them to be productively deployed for you to reap what is called the demographic dividend. Unless otherwise the demographic winter may set in, the question that they have asked you. Right? You can talk about this policy, you can talk about finances too. In fact, you should make recommendations in terms of finances. You should talk about promotion of flow-based lending, which we just spoke of. Right? You should talk about a corpus of funds for platform workers. You should definitely argue for special financial products, especially for platform workers. You should also argue for, in fact, for first-time workers, you can even argue that unsecured lending, these are recommendations that I pulled out from Niti Aayog itself. Unsecured lending to first-time borrowers should be made a part of PSL, priority sector lending. Right? Unsecured loans to first-time borrowers to be made a part of priority sector lending scheme. You have to remember, you have to discuss both aspects. Like, how do you want to promote this economy, and also how do you want to cure what the deficits or what the defects of this economy are. You should talk about this. You should also talk about skill creation, skilling of people. Remember, we are on the verge of the fourth industrial revolution. The nature of the economy, the structure of the economy is going to fundamentally change. The world is going to get even more digitalized. Right? You should talk about preparing a workforce which is skilled. How do you want to do this? The government already has a national apprenticeship promotion scheme. You can utilize this specific scheme. You can definitely talk about vocational training, right? You can talk about skill transferability, which is to say that people who are a part of this gig economy, they should be given certain skill certificates, either by the platform or by certified rating agencies or by government agencies themselves, right? If they have certain skill certificates, after this, what you can do is you can create a synergy between employment portals and skill-based portals. Right, which is say, how many employment-based portals do you have? You may have something like an eShram portal. You have an Udyam portal. You have ASEEM. You also have National Career Services, right? You should connect each of your employment portals with the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, right? Wherein workers may register themselves, they are given certain skill certificates, and then they can be hired, right? This is to take care of the irregularity of work too, right? Which is a precarious nature of work, right? Should focus on skill transferability also. You may also want to talk about social security. The example is that of you can cover this the code on social security also, that takes care of that. Right? Talk about social security too. In terms of social security, you can talk about policies with respect to conditions of work. Enough and more emphasis should be granted in terms of paid leaves, in terms of casual leaves, in terms of sick leaves. In fact, there are certain companies which are already doing it for their partners. Zomato does it, Uber does it, Swiggy does it. Right? Other platform-based workers should also take a leave from their booklet, and they should have policies with respect to sick leaves, casual leaves, paid leaves for their workers. You can talk about this. You can definitely talk about extending health insurance, mandating platform workers to partner with insurance companies and create financial products, which is basically that of insurance products, right, for these platform workers. In fact, you can also talk about occupational health insurance, in fact, occupational risk insurance, which is basically accidental insurance too. Lawyers would know the concept of what is called vicarious liability, right? You are avoiding this vicarious liability, how? By saying that these are not your employees, right? These are basically people who are independent partners, right? They are doing it on their own good. They're not my employees. You avoid what is called vicarious liability. Vicarious liability ka matlab kya? A liability on you because that person is related to you or has done something in the course of work itself, right? Extending occupational risk insurance, so you can say accidental insurance to these people. In fact, you should definitely talk about, because there may emerge irregularity of work, and this irregularity of work may create irregularity of incomes too. You should suggest that the central government or the governments should create a certain corpus of funds, right? You may demand the aggregators, you may demand the central government or that of the state government to create a corpus of funds to take care of irregularity of work, right? Right? Talk about these things. In fact, you should know there is a code called the Code on Social Security 2020, which has certain provisos with respect to these gig economy workers or platform workers. What does the Code on Social Security do? Code on Social Security 2020. Do you know any of these provisions? Right. First, it mandates the central government. The central government will create a social security fund. right? In fact, you have to remember there is a certain context to it. The Code on Social Security, there was a bill in 2019, then it was revised and passed in 2020. Previously, the bill applied to unorganized workers. Then it was extended to unorganized workers, gig workers, and platform workers. And previously, it said the government may notify schemes for unorganized workers. Now the bill says, now the code says, the government, central government will create a social security fund. This fund may even be funded by, or you can say the contributions may come in from the state government too, right? If they want to augment too. Right? You have to talk about this, a social security fund. Not just this, the code also mandates a national social security board. A national social security board will do what? The national social security board's task is overview of the implementation of the code on social security, the implementation of social security schemes primarily. And this board will have representation from gig workers and platform workers. It will have representation from aggregators. Do you know what an aggregator means? Right? It will have representation from the state government. And of course, it will have representation from the central government, right? To overview the implementation of various social security schemes. In fact, the code also mandates the third thing, which is that of the responsibility of account aggregators. Which is to say, the government may mandate contribution coming in from account aggregators, and account aggregators likh diya, from aggregators only, not, don't write it account aggregators, I think it was just rolled over. The code mandates that if the central government, let's say, comes up with a social security scheme for platform workers or for gig workers, it may mandate aggregators to make a financial contribution to it. The financial contribution cannot exceed 5% of their turnover, right? Isse less than equal to hi hona chahiye. But the government may mandate their financial contribution. In addition, there is also one more aspect, which is that of registration, right? Registration of gig workers, registration of platform workers, registration of unorganized workers, right? This is something that you have to remember in context of gig economy, right? By and large, first thing you have to remember is there is a definitional problem, right? You should remember not gig economy, you should remember gig worker. A gig worker would be an individual who is hired on a time-based manner or on a task-based manner, right? And is also given a certain flexibility in terms of plugging and playing, right? Which is, say, flexibility in terms of choosing his hours of work, flexibility in choosing, right, his conditions of work, rather, whenever he wants to plug and play. That is the gig worker. Then you talk about the prospects of the gig economy, talk about certain numbers, and these numbers are only going to explode. Think about the key drivers. The key drivers are primarily twofold. One is technology, and the second thing is demography. And you may add further more points, and you can differentiate it, like you can talk about COVID, you can talk about investments, so on and so forth. But primarily will be two things, technology and demography. Then you talk about the benefits of gig economy, think about issues with respect to gig workers, and then think in terms of what should the government do to accelerate this sector and cure its defects, right? This is what. Anything, any questions? Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, it will. If there is too much handholding, if there is too much intervention, you have to remember this gig economy is blossoming precisely because regulations are not in place. Right? If there is too much regulation, quite obviously it will not blossom as much. That is definitely it will be a concern. Right? One of the primary reasons which you don't mention in your answers is the lack of regulations. Right? The contractors or the companies are doing it because there are no regulations in place for that matter. Right? If there were strict industrial, you can say this is basically with respect to industrial relations, if there were very strict regulations in this specific space, this would not be blossoming. Discourage who? No, that is not a mandatory requirement to have. The idea is that it either could be the aggregator who may certify that this person is, let's say, skilled in so and so and so activities. Right? It could be the aggregator which may certify it. It could be any rating agency for that matter. The government may create certain institutions. For example, it may rope in ITIs for that matter, right? It only has to specify that skill, and the skill should be displayed on the platform, right? In terms of what? Like, what were you trying to talk about? Yeah, yeah. Too much government regulation, of course, you will have to talk about. It is going to strangulate any sector, not just this specific sector itself. Right? You would not argue for a case of too much regulation. You will argue for a case of the idea is to create a transferability of skills of that matter. Right? People should move up the value chain. Right? Create, if there is some skill certification, you may link that skill certification with employment too. For example, there may be prospective employers who may want a certain kind of an individual. The problem is because this economy by and large has been running on informal basis. Now that it is being digitized, it is good, and it's a very, very good opportunity for us to showcase that this is our registered work base, this is the kind of skill that they have, right? And they may be matched corresponding to the kind of job requirement that they may emerge. That is the idea behind it. Right. Mandating a skill requirement would basically be, that will be basically an antithesis of this entire economy. This economy is blossoming because there are very, very low entry barriers. You want to raise entry barriers, quite obviously this economy will be killed. Any questions? Chalo, we wrap up today.